Single dad, working as a gatekeeper, saved a powerful man's wife unaware he'd steal her heart. 2:17 a.m. Connecticut's autumn mist clings to the pristine hedges of Sterling Estate as Marcus sweeps his flashlight across marble fountains and imported rose gardens. The beam suddenly catches something beneath the mirror-black surface of the infinity Pula phantom figure, sinking like a fallen angel, platinum hair fanning out in slow motion through crystal-clear water. Time fractures. His radio hits Italian stone with a crack as he dives into the shocking cold, pulling up a woman whose haunted blue eyes reflect more pain than the moon above. Her silk nightgown, worth 3 months of his trailer park rent, clings to trembling shoulders as she whispers words that will shatter both their carefully constructed worlds. Why did you save me when I didn't want to be saved? The question hangs in the millionaire's garden like morning fog, heavy with secrets that will soon consume them both. 6 months earlier, Marcus Thompson had stood in the estate's security office, watching surveillance monitors flicker between empty rooms and manicured lawns while his supervisor explained the rules. Mr. Sterling values discretion above all else, the head of security had warned, his weathered face serious in the blue glow of a dozen screens. You see nothing, hear nothing, and most importantly, you never interact with family members unless there's an immediate emergency. Marcus nodded, his 34-year-old hands steady despite the desperation that had driven him here. 3 years had passed since Sarah's funeral, 3 years of watching cancer bills devour their savings while he juggled part-time jobs that barely covered rent on their double-wide trailer. Engineering degrees meant nothing when you couldn't afford the suits for interviews or the gas money to drive to corporate offices in Hartford. The Sterling estate sprawled across 47 acres of Millbrook's most exclusive real estate, where old money whispered through iron gates and surveillance cameras watched every shadow. Marcus's first week passed in relative quiet, learned the patrol routes, memorized security codes, and tried not to feel like an imposter walking among fountains that cost more than most people's houses. His daughter Lily, 8 years old with Sarah's green eyes and his stubborn chin, thought his new uniform made him look like a movie star. She didn't need to know that Daddy's prestigious security job was really just a fancy way of saying he walked around rich people's property all night, checking locks and pretending his presence actually deterred the kind of criminals who targeted estates like this. Richard Sterling was exactly what Marcus had expected from a man who owned half of Manhattan's financial district, silver-haired, sharp-suited, and possessed of the casual arrogance that came from never having heard the word no, spoken with genuine conviction. At 45, Sterling moved through his estate like a king surveying his kingdom, speaking to staff with the detached politeness of someone who viewed other humans as expensive but replaceable fixtures. His wife Elena was a different story entirely. Marcus caught glimpses of her through floor-to-ceiling windows, a wraith-like figure in flowing white who played piano with the desperate intensity of someone pouring their soul into melodies that no one else would ever hear. Elena Sterling was 33 years old and moved through her mansion like a beautiful ghost, her platinum hair catching moonlight as she wandered gardens that felt more like an elegant prison than a home. Marcus learned her patterns during his first month. She played piano between midnight and 3 a.m., always the same melancholy pieces that drifted through the estate's perfectly climate-controlled air like musical prayers. She wore designer pajamas that probably cost more than his monthly salary, but there was something in her posture that spoke of bone-deep exhaustion rather than luxury. The few times their paths crossed during his rounds, she offered only the polite nod of someone acknowledging the help, her ocean blue eyes holding depths he couldn't fathom but desperately wanted to understand. The night that changed everything started like dozens of others, with Marcus completing his 2 a.m. rounds while Connecticut's October air bit through his security jacket. He'd been walking the pool perimeter when his flashlight beam caught movement beneath the water's surface, not the expected ripple of the automated cleaning system, but something human and still and utterly wrong. Training took over before conscious thought could interfere. He dropped his radio, kicked off his steel-toed boots, and dove into water so cold it felt like liquid electricity racing through his veins. His hands found fabric, then skin, then the dead weight of someone who'd given up fighting. Breaking the surface with Elena in his arms, Marcus felt time stretch like taffy as he pulled her onto Italian stone that cost more per square foot than most people earned in a week. Elena's first conscious breath was a sob that seemed to come from somewhere deeper than her lungs, her body convulsing with cold and something that had nothing to do with temperature. She wore a silk nightgown that clung to her like a second skin, and when she opened her eyes to look at him, Marcus saw an ocean of pain that made his chest ache with recognition. "Why?" she whispered, her voice barely audible above the pool's filtration system. Why did you save me when I didn't want to be saved? The question hit him like a physical blow, because he recognized the tone. It was the same desperate confusion Sarah had voiced during her worst days, when cancer had stolen everything but the biological imperative to keep breathing. Marcus wrapped Elena in his security jacket, noting how it dwarfed her delicate frame while she shivered against stone that had absorbed the day's warmth and released it into the indifferent night. Because, he said quietly, his voice steadier than he felt, sometimes we don't know what we want until someone shows us we're worth saving. The words surprised him. He hadn't meant to say anything so personal, so revealing of his own struggles with grief and purpose. Elena studied his face in the pool lights, her expression shifting from confusion to something that might have been gratitude if it hadn't been wrapped in so much pain. When she asked if he had children, Marcus found himself showing her wallet photos of Lily, surprised by how natural it felt to share pieces of his carefully guarded life with this stranger who'd almost slipped away forever. The estate's medical response team arrived within minutes. Private physicians who asked no uncomfortable questions and documented everything as a simple accident. Elena insisted she'd merely slipped while walking the pool's edge, her acting performance flawless enough to convince everyone except Marcus, who'd seen the deliberate way she'd let herself sink. As paramedics checked her vital signs and Richard Sterling appeared in a silk robe that probably cost more than Marcus's car, Elena caught his eye one final time. "Thank you," she mouthed silently, and in those two words lived a universe of gratitude that had nothing to do with drowning and everything to do with being seen by someone who understood that sometimes the act of living required more courage than dying. The next evening brought an unexpected visitor to Marcus's security station. Elena, looking impossibly young in jeans and a cable-knit sweater that made her seem like any other Connecticut housewife rather than the troubled mistress of a 47-acre estate. She carried 2 cups of coffee from the estate's commercial-grade kitchen, her hands steady despite the previous night's trauma. "I realized I never properly thanked you," she said, settling into the chair across from his desk with the careful movements of someone still processing shock. "And I wanted to apologize for putting you in that situation." Marcus accepted the coffee, noting how she took hers black and bitter, like someone who'd learned to find comfort in harsh things. Their first real conversation lasted 3 hours, moving from careful pleasantries to the kind of honest exchange that usually took months to develop. Elena asked about Lily with genuine interest, her face transforming when Marcus described his daughter's dreams of becoming a pianist like the lady in the big house. "She practices on a keyboard we bought at a garage sale," Marcus admitted, feeling the familiar sting of not being able to provide everything his child deserved. "The keys stick, and half the sounds don't work, but she plays it like it's a Steinway." Elena's eyes lit up with the first genuine emotion he'd seen from her, and she leaned forward with sudden intensity. Would you let me teach her? I mean, if you're comfortable with it. I have a degree from Juilliard, and She trailed off, but Marcus could fill in the blanks. She had talent, training, and a desperate need to share her gifts with someone who might appreciate them. That conversation established a pattern that would define the next several months of their lives. Elena began appearing during Marcus's rounds with increasing frequency, always dressed in casual clothes that made her seem more human and less like the untouchable goddess who graced society pages. They talked about music, about parenthood, about books and dreams, and all the small disappointments that shaped ordinary lives. Marcus learned that Elena had been a prodigy, accepted to Juilliard at 16 with a full scholarship and a future that stretched before her like an endless stage. She'd met Richard Sterling during her senior year, when he'd attended one of her recitals and pursued her with the single-minded determination of a man accustomed to acquiring beautiful things. The marriage had started as a fairy tale, a brilliant young artist rescued from student loans and uncertain career prospects by a wealthy older man who promised to support her musical ambitions. But fairy tales, Elena explained with bitter hindsight, often concealed darker truths. Richard's support came with invisible strings attached. She could play piano as a hobby, but never professionally. She could compose music, but only for private enjoyment. She could have opinions, but only if they aligned with his vision of the perfect society wife. Slowly, methodically, he'd isolated her from friends, family, and the music community that had once been her entire world. "I didn't realize what was happening until it was too late," she admitted during one of their midnight conversations. "By then, I'd signed agreements that made leaving financially impossible and legally complicated." Marcus found himself sharing details of his own life that he'd kept locked away since Sarah's death. His engineering background, his patents for medical devices that could have changed lives if he'd had the resources to develop them, his dreams of building something meaningful instead of just surviving from paycheck to paycheck. Elena listened with the intensity of someone starved for genuine human connection, asking thoughtful questions that revealed an intelligence Richard Sterling seemed determined to waste. She had opinions about everything from architecture to astronomy, passions that had been forced underground but never extinguished. Watching her come alive during their conversations, Marcus understood that he wasn't just falling in love with a beautiful woman. He was falling for a brilliant mind, trapped in circumstances that grew more tragic the better he knew her. Their relationship deepened through small gestures that carried enormous weight. Elena began leaving handwritten sheet music in places where only Marcus would find them, original compositions tucked behind loose stones in garden walls or slipped under equipment covers in the security shed. The pieces had titles like Midnight Rounds and Conversations in Shadow, melodies that captured their growing connection with mathematical precision and emotional honesty. Marcus responded by sharing stories of Lily's latest adventures, describing his daughter's personality with the tender detail of a man who understood that love meant paying attention to the smallest moments that made someone unique. One November night, following a sound disturbance report, Marcus discovered Elena in the estate's formal music room, playing an original composition that made his chest ache with its raw beauty. The piece was complex and haunting, filled with the kind of technical skill that reminded him she'd once been considered one of the most promising pianists of her generation. She stopped mid-phrase when she noticed him, her cheeks flushing with embarrassment. "I didn't think anyone could hear," she said, her hands hovering uncertainly over the keys. "Richard doesn't like it when I play my own pieces. He says they're too dark, too emotional for entertaining guests." Marcus stepped closer, noting the dozens of handwritten compositions scattered across the piano's surface, a lifetime of musical thoughts that had been dismissed as unsuitable for public consumption. "These are incredible," Marcus said, meaning every word as he studied the complex arrangements that revealed Elena's true artistic voice. "Why aren't you performing them, recording them, sharing them with the world?" The questions hung in the air like discordant notes, and Elena's face closed off faster than a slammed door. "Because Richard Sterling's wife doesn't need a career," she replied, her voice carrying the hollow tone of someone reciting words that had been drilled into them through repetition and psychological pressure. "I have everything a woman could want: security, comfort, status. What more could I possibly need?" But her hands trembled as she gathered the scattered sheet music, and Marcus saw tears threatening to spill from eyes that had learned to hide too much pain behind perfect composure. That night marked a turning point in their relationship, though neither could have predicted the dangerous territory they were entering. Marcus began staying longer during his conversations with Elena, their exchanges growing more personal and emotionally intimate with each passing week. She told him about the panic attacks that seized her during Richard's business dinners, when she was expected to perform the role of devoted wife while feeling like an actress in a play she'd never auditioned for. He shared his fears about raising Lily alone, his terror that he was failing as a father because he couldn't provide the opportunities his daughter deserved. "You're a wonderful father," Elena assured him one December night, her hand briefly covering his in a gesture that sent electricity shooting up his arm. "Lily is lucky to have someone who loves her enough to sacrifice his own dreams for hers." The physical contact was brief, but charged with possibility, and both pulled back as if they'd been burned. They were treading in dangerous waters now, their friendship crossing boundaries that could destroy both their lives if discovered. But the connection between them had grown too strong to ignore, built on late-night conversations that revealed compatible minds and wounded hearts that recognized each other across the vast divide of their different circumstances. Marcus began adjusting his patrol routes to maximize their time together, while Elena started taking evening walks that coincidentally aligned with his security rounds. They never touched again, but they didn't need to. Their emotional intimacy was developing into something far more threatening to the established order than simple physical attraction. It was during one of these carefully orchestrated encounters that Marcus first witnessed the darker side of Elena's marriage firsthand. He was completing his midnight rounds when angry voices erupted from the main house, Richard Sterling's furious baritone cutting through Elena's softer attempts at explanation. Through the kitchen window, Marcus watched Elena backing away from her husband, her hands raised defensively as he advanced on her with barely controlled rage. "You think I don't know what you're doing?" Richard snarled, his usually perfect composure cracking to reveal something vicious underneath. "You think I don't see the way you look at him? The way you smile when you think no one's watching?" The accusation hung in the air like poison gas, and Marcus felt his blood freeze as he realized they'd been discovered. The sound of flesh hitting flesh carried across the manicured gardens like a gunshot, followed by Elena's sharp cry and the slam of a door that seemed to echo through the entire estate. Marcus stood frozen in the shadows, every instinct screaming at him to intervene, while his rational mind reminded him of the legal and professional boundaries he couldn't cross without destroying any chance of helping Elena in the long run. When she emerged 20 minutes later, her face was carefully composed, but her left cheek bore the telltale redness of a fresh slap. She walked to the pool area where they usually met, moving with the careful precision of someone trying not to jostle newly formed bruises. "He knows," she said simply, not bothering with explanations that would only make their situation more dangerous. Marcus felt rage building in his chest like pressure in a steam engine, but Elena's next words stopped him from doing something that would have ended badly for both of them. "Don't," she said quietly, reading his expression with the accuracy of someone who'd learned to anticipate violence. "Richard Sterling doesn't just fire people who cross him, he destroys them. He has lawyers, investigators, connections that reach into every corner of this state. If you try to help me, he'll make sure you lose Lily." The threat was delivered matter-of-factly, but Marcus could see the terror behind Elena's composed facade. She was protecting him the only way she knew how, by pushing him away before Richard could make good on promises that both knew weren't empty threats. Their relationship changed after that night, becoming more cautious but paradoxically deeper as they both understood the stakes involved. Elena began carrying a small recording device during her interactions with Richard, gathering evidence of his psychological and emotional abuse with the methodical patience of someone planning a long-term escape strategy. She shared fragments of these recordings with Marcus, conversations that revealed the systematic way Richard had isolated her from friends, family, and professional opportunities. "I've been documenting everything for months," she explained during one of their increasingly rare meetings. "The emotional manipulation, the financial control, the threats against anyone who tries to help me. But I need more than just recordings. I need evidence of his illegal business activities before I can safely leave." Marcus found himself drawn deeper into Elena's world of secrets and careful planning, his engineering background proving useful as they developed secure communication methods and evidence storage protocols. Elena had discovered that Richard's business empire was built on a foundation of fraud and tax evasion, but gathering proof required access to files and conversations that were carefully guarded. "He keeps everything important in his private office," she explained, "and he changes the security codes weekly. But there are patterns to his behavior, times when he's predictable enough to take calculated risks." Marcus admired her courage even as he worried about the consequences of discovery. Richard Sterling didn't seem like the type of man who would accept betrayal quietly. The crisis that changed everything began on a February night when Lily developed a severe case of pneumonia that required immediate hospitalization. Marcus called the estate to request emergency leave, but Richard Sterling was hosting a crucial business dinner and refused to allow any flexibility in the security schedule. "Your personal problems," Sterling said coldly over the phone, his voice carrying the dismissive tone of someone discussing an inconvenient equipment malfunction, "are not my concern. Miss another shift, and you'll be terminated immediately." The choice was impossibly cruel: stay at work while his daughter struggled to breathe in a hospital bed, or lose the job that provided their health insurance and housing stability. Marcus chose Lily without hesitation, driving to Connecticut Children's Medical Center while calling in every favor he'd accumulated to arrange coverage for his shift. He spent the next 18 hours in the pediatric intensive care unit, holding his daughter's burning hand while machines monitored her labored breathing and doctors spoke in the careful tones reserved for serious situations. When Elena appeared at 2 a.m., having told Richard she was attending a charity function, Marcus felt something break inside his chest, gratitude so profound it bordered on religious experience. She brought books, music boxes, and most importantly, the gentle presence of someone who understood that sometimes love meant showing up when it was inconvenient and dangerous. "How did you know?" Marcus asked as Elena settled into the uncomfortable hospital chair beside Lily's bed, her designer clothes looking out of place but her presence feeling absolutely right. "Hospital records are surprisingly easy to access when your husband donates millions to medical facilities," she replied with a sad smile. "I've been monitoring Lily's condition since you called in sick. Richard was furious about your absence, but I convinced him that firing you during a family emergency would look bad if the staff gossip reached the wrong ears." She stayed until morning, reading to Lily when the little girl was awake and providing quiet companionship when fever-induced sleep offered temporary relief from the pneumonia's grip. That night, as Lily slept fitfully between them, Elena and Marcus finally acknowledged what had been building for months, with the inevitability of a storm system moving across a weather map. "I love you," she whispered into the hospital room's antiseptic air, her voice barely audible above the monitors and machines that were keeping his daughter alive. "I love you too," he replied, the admission changing nothing and everything simultaneously. They couldn't touch, not here, not anywhere, but the words hung between them like a bridge spanning two impossible worlds. Love, they both understood, wasn't always about being together. Sometimes it was about caring enough to want the best for someone even when that meant accepting separation. Elena stayed through Lily's recovery, visiting during evening hours when Richard believed she was attending social functions or charity meetings. She helped Marcus navigate insurance paperwork with the efficiency of someone educated at elite institutions, and she played quiet piano pieces on her phone that seemed to ease Lily's breathing during the worst nights. When his daughter finally turned the corner toward recovery, Elena was there to celebrate the small victories: the first full meal, the first laugh, the first request to go home and practice piano on their garage sale keyboard. "She's going to be a remarkable musician," Elena predicted, studying Lily's small hands with professional interest. "She has natural timing and an ear for harmony that can't be taught." Richard Sterling's revenge was swift and comprehensive when Marcus returned to work after Lily's week-long hospitalization. The termination letter was hand-delivered by Sterling's personal attorney, accompanied by an eviction notice for the trailer and thinly veiled threats about Marcus's inappropriate conduct with the Sterling family. The message was crystal clear: disappear quietly or face consequences that would destroy what little stability remained in his daughter's life. Worse, the letter included references to custody evaluations and suggestions that Marcus's financial instability made him an unfit parent, threats that struck at his deepest fears about protecting Lily from the chaos that had defined their lives since Sarah's death. Elena called his cell phone within hours of his termination, her voice shaking with grief and rage as she explained Richard's ultimatum. "He knows about us," she said, her words barely coherent through tears that had been building for months. "He has security footage from the hospital, pictures of us talking in the garden, recordings of our conversations that his investigators somehow obtained. He's given me a choice: recommit to our marriage with public appearances and renewed devotion, or watch him destroy you and take Lily away through child services investigations that he can definitely influence." The choice was designed to be impossible, forcing Elena to choose between her own freedom and the safety of the people she'd come to love. The final confrontation happened 2 days later in Sterling's mahogany-paneled study, where Marcus had been summoned under the pretense of retrieving his final paycheck and returning estate property. Richard Sterling stood behind his antique desk like a general commanding conquered territory, his silver hair perfectly styled and his custom suit immaculate despite the early morning hour. Behind him, floor-to-ceiling windows offered views of gardens where Marcus and Elena had shared their most intimate conversations, now feeling like evidence in a trial where the verdict had already been decided. "You've been a competent employee," Sterling began, his voice carrying the casual cruelty of someone accustomed to purchasing people's silence and compliance. "But you've forgotten your place," Sterling continued, opening a leather checkbook with theatrical precision and writing an amount that would solve Marcus's immediate financial problems while simultaneously purchasing his permanent disappearance. "This should cover relocation expenses for you and your daughter. I hear Florida has excellent schools and year-round employment opportunities for men with your limited skill set." The insult was delivered with surgical precision, designed to remind Marcus of exactly how powerless he was in this situation. "Take the money, move somewhere warm for your daughter's health, and forget my wife exists. Refuse, and I'll ensure you never work in security again, anywhere in New England. Worse, I'll make sure Child Protective Services takes a very close look at your parenting capabilities." Marcus studied the check, more money than he'd seen at one time since Sarah's life insurance payout, then slowly, deliberately tore it in half. The sound of paper ripping seemed unnaturally loud in the expensive silence of Sterling's office, and Marcus watched the older man's face transform from smug confidence to genuine shock. "Some things aren't for sale," Marcus said quietly, meeting Sterling's gaze with steady determination that came from finally understanding what he was truly fighting for. "Your wife deserves better than a man who treats love like a business transaction and marriage like a corporate acquisition." The words hung in the expensive air like smoke from a fired gun, and Marcus felt a strange peace settle over him as he realized he'd finally found a line he wouldn't cross, regardless of the consequences. Sterling's response was immediate and vicious, his composed facade cracking to reveal the ruthless predator underneath. You have 24 hours to reconsider your position, he said, his voice dropping to a whisper that carried more menace than any shout. After that, I'll consider you a hostile actor and respond accordingly. You'll find that people who cross Richard Sterling tend to experience a remarkable series of unfortunate coincidences: lost jobs, failed credit checks, custody investigations that somehow always find concerning evidence. Marcus left without another word, knowing he'd just declared war on a man with unlimited resources and no conscience, but feeling more alive than he had since the night he'd pulled Elena from the pool and realized that some people were worth saving even when they didn't want to be saved. That night brought Elena to his trailer door for the first and last time, appearing like a ghost in designer clothes and genuine desperation that made her more beautiful and tragic than any of the society photos that graced Connecticut's luxury magazines. She pressed a small recording device into Marcus's hands with trembling fingers, her touch electric even in their moment of crisis. "I've been gathering evidence for months," she whispered, her voice shaking with fear and determination in equal measure. Conversations about insurance fraud, tax evasion, bribery of government officials, enough to bring down his entire empire if it reaches the right people. But I can't give this to the authorities myself. He monitors my every move, tracks my communications, watches my bank accounts. If this evidence surfaces, he'll know it came from me. The device felt heavy in Marcus's hands, loaded with the potential to free Elena while simultaneously painting targets on both their backs that would never disappear. "There's something else," Elena continued, her eyes bright with tears and desperate hope. "I've been in contact with federal investigators who've been building a case against Richard for years. They need an inside source, someone with access to his private conversations and business records. I can be that source, but only if I stay married to him long enough to gather the evidence they need." The plan was breathtakingly dangerous and required Elena to remain in an abusive situation for an indefinite period while building a case that could take years to prosecute. "If something happens to me," Elena said, pressing a second item into his handsaw key to a safety deposit box containing additional evidence and detailed instructions for contacting the federal agents working the case. "Promise me you'll make sure the world knows who Richard Sterling really is. Promise me you'll protect Lily from any retaliation he might attempt. And promise me you'll remember that love sometimes means making impossible choices to protect the people who matter most." Marcus took the key and the recording device, understanding that he was accepting responsibility for Elena's life and freedom along with his own daughter's safety. Their goodbye was wordless, a look that contained months of shared secrets, growing love, and mutual sacrifice that would define the rest of their lives, whether they saw each other again or not. Elena left his trailer and walked back to her gilded prison, while Marcus sat in his small kitchen planning the most important mission of his life. He had evidence that could destroy Richard Sterling, connections to federal investigators who'd been waiting years for this opportunity, and 24 hours to set events in motion before Sterling's threats became reality. The security guard job had been temporary, but the responsibility Elena had placed in his hands would last forever. The next morning brought news that changed everything. Elena Sterling had been found unconscious in her car after what appeared to be a single-vehicle accident on a winding Millbrook road. The official story painted her as a distracted driver who'd lost control during an early morning ice storm, but Marcus knew better as he sat in the hospital waiting room for 18 agonizing hours. Richard Sterling played the devoted husband for cameras and reporters, while privately making phone calls about damage control and managing the narrative that confirmed Marcus's worst fears about the accident's true nature. When Elena finally regained consciousness, she claimed to remember nothing about the crash or the days leading up to Waita, for convenient amnesia that kept her alive but erased any immediate chance of justice. But Elena's amnesia was as carefully performed as everything else in her life, and the recording device Marcus had hidden was already in the hands of FBI agents who'd been building their case against Sterling for 3 years. Over the following months, as Elena recovered from injuries that looked suspiciously like someone had beaten her before placing her in that car, federal investigators quietly gathered additional evidence from financial records, wiretapped conversations, and testimony from other victims of Sterling's business practices. The investigation proceeded with the methodical patience of professionals who understood that men like Richard Sterling could only be brought down by overwhelming evidence and perfect legal strategy. 6 months after the accident, FBI agents arrested Richard Sterling on charges ranging from tax fraud to witness intimidation to conspiracy to commit murder, the attempted killing of his own wife being the final charge that would ensure he never saw freedom again. Elena's carefully documented evidence provided the foundation for a case that would dismantle Sterling's entire criminal empire, while her cooperation with federal authorities earned her protection and a new identity through the Witness Protection Program. The media called it the fall of a financial dynasty, but Marcus knew it was actually the story of a woman who'd found the courage to save herself and others from a predator who'd operated with impunity for decades. Elena disappeared into witness protection the day after Richard's arrest, leaving behind only a letter for Marcus that was delivered by federal marshals who seemed to understand the depth of their connection. "Thank you for teaching me that love means setting someone free," the letter read in handwriting that had become as familiar as his own daughter's. "Thank you for showing me that some people are brave enough to do the right thing even when it costs them everything. Watch for my music in the world, it will find you when the time is right, and you'll know that freedom sounds like hope after the storm." The letter was signed simply E, and included a small silver music note pendant that Lily wore around her neck like a talisman connecting her to the woman who'd shown them both what courage looked like. Marcus sold his trailer and used Sarah's small life insurance policy to buy a music shop in Vermont, where snow fell clean and people understood the value of starting over without asking too many questions about the past. The shop specialized in sheet music and piano instruction, and Marcus found unexpected joy in helping other families discover the transformative power of music education. Lily thrived in their new environment, her natural talent developing under the guidance of local instructors who recognized her exceptional abilities and nurtured them without the pressure of elite competition. 2 years passed before Marcus received the package that confirmed Elena had found her freedom and was using it to rebuild the musical career that Richard Sterling had tried to destroy. The unmarked envelope contained a professionally produced CD of original piano compositions along with a single photograph that made his heart skip several beats. Elena sat at an upright piano in what appeared to be a community center, surrounded by children whose faces glowed with the same joy Marcus remembered from Lily's first real piano lessons. Her hair was shorter and darker, her face fuller and more relaxed than he'd ever seen it, and her smile held the genuine happiness that had been missing during all their moonlit conversations in Sterling's garden. On the back of the photograph, someone had written "Hope After the Storm" in handwriting he would have recognized across a crowded room, along with the address for a music therapy program in a small Oregon town where Elena was apparently teaching piano to underprivileged children. Marcus played the CD that night after Lily fell asleep, tears streaming down his face as melodies filled with healing and possibility floated through their small apartment above the music shop. The compositions told the story of their shared journey from the dark, complex pieces that reflected Elena's trapped years to triumphant crescendos that spoke of freedom and new beginnings. Some love stories, Marcus realized as he listened to Elena's musical autobiography, don't end with two people together, they end with two people free to become who they were always meant to be. The security guard job at Sterling Estate had lasted only 6 months, but the lessons learned during those moonlit conversations would influence every decision he made for the rest of his life. Love, real love, wasn't about possession or control or even being together. It was about caring enough to fight for someone's freedom, even when that freedom meant never seeing them again. Years passed, seasons changed, and Marcus built a life in Vermont that honored both Sarah's memory and Elena's sacrifice. The music shop became a gathering place for local families, a space where children learned that music could express emotions too complex for words, and adults rediscovered passions they'd thought were lost forever. Marcus dated occasionally but never seriously, carrying Elena's memory like a song that played too softly to quite hear but too clearly to ever forget. When customers asked about the framed photograph displayed near the register, Elena, surrounded by children at a piano, he'd smile and say it showed a teacher who'd helped him understand that the greatest gift you can give someone is the courage to save themselves. On quiet winter nights, when snow muffled the world outside his shop and Lily practiced piano upstairs with the skill of someone born to make music, Marcus would sometimes catch himself listening for the sound of designer shoes on marble floors, and remembering a woman who taught him that heroism often looked like ordinary people, making extraordinary choices in impossible circumstances. The recording device Elena had given him remained in a safety deposit box, its contents having served their purpose in bringing Richard Sterling to justice, but Marcus kept the key as a reminder that some secrets are worth keeping, and some battles are worth fighting regardless of the personal cost. And sometimes, when the wind was just right and Lily played Elena's compositions with the passion of someone who understood that music could change the world one note at a time, Marcus could swear he heard two pianos playing in harmonione in his small Vermont shop, another somewhere far away where a brilliant woman had finally found the freedom to be exactly who she was always meant to be. Love, he'd learned through loss and sacrifice, and the kind of courage that comes from protecting what matters most, wasn't always about staying together. Sometimes the greatest love story was knowing when to let go, when to fight, and when to trust that the people we save might just save us in return.